Can everyone join me in saying hello to Toby? Hi, Toby. I just want to thank the photographer Frank Nolker for allowing me to use these photographs as I talk about the chimps. Can chimpanzees forgive? Let's see the hands. Anyone think that? Okay, we've got some primate behavior aficionados out there. We're going to get to that question in a bit, but the question I'm more interested in is this. Can chimpanzees forgive us? Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I can see it on some faces right down here. Why would we need to be forgiven by a chimpanzee? We've let them into our houses. We've brought them into zoos. We've put them on the television screen during the Super Bowl. We've taught them sign language. We've taught them to take bubble baths. We have taught them how to eat with utensils, and we have taught them how to drive a car. Even Hollywood has got into the game. They put chimps in movies. Do you know how many bananas this guy would eat to be in a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio? And every time I hear about a chimp these days, it's because either they just attacked someone or they're suing humans in New York State court. So, okay, maybe this guy doesn't think quite so extremely on the topic, but I'm sure some of you are wondering, why would I wonder if chimpanzees can forgive us? Well, that's why I'm here today, to bring you up to speed. What have we done that we would need forgiveness? Well, over the last 100 years, and in the name of scientific research, we've done a few things. We have implanted electrodes into chimpanzee brains. We have shattered their skulls with blunt force trauma. We have used them as crash test dummies. We've exposed them to toxic chemicals and pharmaceuticals. We have taken them away from their mothers just days after they were born. We've done a lot of stuff. We've even shot them into space. And one more thing. This is Rachel. We've driven many chimpanzees psychotic. Wasn't expecting a laugh. But thank you for lightening it. Turns out one of the latest breakthroughs about the similarities between chimpanzees and humans is this, that lab chimps actually exhibit some of the same symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that human prisoners of war do. And the worst part is, we've learned next to nothing from this kind of research on chimps. It turns out chimpanzees are a terrible model for human medicine. So that's just chimps in the lab. What about chimps in the wild? It doesn't get much better. We've decimated wild chimp populations, our closest evolutionary relatives, by more than 90%. That's the end of the downer. I'm not here to be a downer, but plum Hollywood roles aside, I think it's definitely us and not the chimpanzees that need to be asking for forgiveness in this relationship. So, can a chimpanzee forgive us? I'd like to tell you a few stories, and then I'll let you guys decide. So a few summers ago, as a journalist and a writer, I lived and worked for 10 weeks at an animal sanctuary outside of Montreal called the Fauna Foundation. Fauna was founded by a woman named Gloria Groh and her partner Richard Allen. And their most famous residence as an animal sanctuary is a family of ex-lab chimpanzees who've been retired from a lab in Upper New York State. Now, in the lab, life for these chimps was pretty close to hell. They were held captive in tiny cages that were just dangling above the floor like little bird cages. They were fed a mundane diet of protein pucks. They were shot with dart guns repeatedly to knock them unconscious. And every now and then, a chimpanzee would be removed from its unit and disappear into a scientific protocol for sometimes months and even years on end. And during these protocols, they'd undergo punch liver biopsies, open liver biopsies, they'd have their blood drawn, and they'd be injected with lethal human viruses like HIV and hepatitis. But at the Fauna Foundation, the chimpanzees can finally forget those horrors. Gloria and Richard built this incredible building on their animal sanctuary. It's called the Chimp House. And it's like Shangri-La for an ex-lab chimp. It's a huge building, and inside there's human areas and chimp areas. And the chimp areas have big walkways and tunnels and places to hide and massive playrooms and places to sit with all the other chimps and groom. And then outside in the back, there's a huge island complex where the chimps can go outside and actually feel the grass beneath their feet. It's an amazing, amazing place. And the human areas like the kitchen and the observation room and the medical clinic are there as well. So in many ways, the Chimp House at the Fauna Foundation is where the human worlds and the chimpanzee worlds converge. So one day, Gloria and I were outside on the islands watching the chimps play when we heard a terrible screaming coming from the Chimp House. We ran back inside, and what we found was amazing. We found on the top walkway of one of the playrooms 2 massive male chimpanzees fighting. And it was a rolling ball of flailing limbs and gnashing teeth. And all the other chimps had lined the playroom outside and were watching the fight. And we couldn't tell who was in the fight at first until Jethro released. This is Jethro. He actually lost hold of Toby, and Toby got out of the fight, and he just about got away when Jethro reached out and grabbed Toby's ankle to pull him back in. And at this moment, all the chimps around the room went berserk because they knew Jethro now had Toby at his mercy. And then Jethro did a really strange thing. Jethro let go of Toby's ankle. And Toby immediately went running down to the bottom floor and hid in a corner and started hugging himself and tantrum screaming. And it was so piercing that I had to cover my ears. And he had a blood on his lip and he was missing a tooth. And I sat with Toby for a while, and then after about 10 minutes, he calmed down, and then he did something strange. He went back to the scene of the battle, and he sat down, and Jethro was way over in the corner, seething still. And Toby sat down with his back to Jethro, and then Jethro did something else strange. He got up and ambled over to Toby and sat down about 10 feet behind Toby and started whimpering under his breath, and he reached his hand out to Toby. Now, all Toby had to do was turn around, reach out, grab Jethro's hand, maybe bring it to his mouth and touch it to his lips, and then the two would shuffle together and have a very common reconciliation ritual where they would touch their lips together. But Toby was raised in a zoo most of his life. He didn't know how to act like a chimpanzee, so instead of taking Jethro's hand, he ran back downstairs screaming. But the point is this: if reconciliation is so crucial to chimpanzee societies. In fact, it's been studied in more than 25 different primate societies. So if a species like a chimp has developed whole rituals, elaborate rituals with which to let bygones be bygones, wouldn't it be okay to suggest that maybe they know something about forgiveness? So let's bring humans into the story. I'd like to tell you about a man named Pat. Pat's a complicated character. Pat used to own the farm where the Fauna Foundation now is. And by his own admission, Pat was a homophobic, conservative, tough exterior rancher. If he didn't like the cut of your jib, he wouldn't talk to you. He was also deathly afraid of getting HIV or AIDS from mosquito bites. This was back in the 1990s, so we should maybe give him a little credit. So when Pat sold, he was happy to sell his land to Gloria and she could start her animal sanctuary. But when he heard that Gloria was thinking of making a home on her farm for HIV-positive chimpanzees, Pat nearly lost it. And then Gloria came home one day from a visit to the laboratory in New York. And she said, "Pat, I met a chimpanzee today that is just like you. You have to come and meet him." So Pat wasn't sure, but he reluctantly went with Gloria on the next trip down to the lab, and he followed Gloria into the biohazard unit where they keep the HIV-positive chimps. And what happened next changed Pat's life forever. He saw a few lab techs gathered around a cage, and inside the cage was a middle-aged, grizzled-looking chimpanzee named Tom. Now, Pat didn't know it at the time, but Tom had been through more than most of the other chimps at the laboratory. He'd been shot with dart guns literally hundreds of times. And he'd been injected with multiple strains of HIV. And the lab techs were having trouble moving Tom through a walkway enclosure into an empty cage so that they could clean his cage. He just wouldn't move. And something about the way that Tom was stubbornly resisting what the humans wanted from him struck a chord with Pat. So Pat went over to that empty cage, and in his bellowing baritone, he yelled, "Come here, Tommy. Come on over here, big guy." And immediately, Tommy stood up, walked through the walkway tunnel, and sat down next to this strange, abrasive new man. And from then on, Pat and Tom were inseparable. Gloria liked to call them soulmates. Their relationship blossomed at Fauna. Pat had he'd become best buds with an HIV-positive chimpanzee. And when he retired from Fauna, he continued to visit Tom. And I was there one day when Pat pulled up on his big, growling Harley Davidson, and he came in looking all tough, and he walked over to Tom's enclosure, and he reached his hands into Tom's enclosure and started tickling Tom like crazy. And Tom was just laughing with abandon. He was so happy. And then he would try to tickle Pat, and then it would devolve into a big play fight, and then the two would just end up in this big bear hug to say hello. It's a very famous story, Pat and Tom. Pat has softened remarkably since he met Tom, by his own admission. And this is what Pat told me about Tom. He said, and I'm going to paraphrase, "A chimp like Tom, when you think about what we've put him through, and he's still willing to forgive, that's an amazing animal that can do that. If it were me, and I'd had half the stuff done to me that Tom had, I'd come looking for you. I'd want revenge, but not Tom." So it seems there's at least one person out there who believes that chimpanzees can forgive us. But have we ever witnessed a chimpanzee forgiving a human? Well, now I'm going to let you decide that as well. And this story has to do with a man named Dave. Dave used to work at the lab. He was a lab tech with these chimpanzees. And after they'd been rescued and retired, Gloria invited Dave to come and see the chimps in Shangri-La, to see them with the new hair they'd grown and the weight they'd put on and how happy they looked. So Dave showed up and he said immediately, "I want to see Sue Ellen." Sue Ellen was his favorite chimp, a.k.a. Susie Goose. They were really close, favorite chimps. So they went, Gloria took him around to the back where there's a big 3-story playroom, and they couldn't find Sue Ellen anywhere, but they did find Pepper, Sue Ellen's best friend. And Pepper was way up on a high climbing structure. And she looked down and she saw Dave at the caging. And Pepper immediately screamed, went running down the play structure, came all the way up to the caging right in front of Dave and put her hands way up here, and her whole body was trembling, and she pursed her lips and she stuck her lips through the caging to Dave. And Dave looked at Gloria, and Gloria looked at Dave, and she said, "Are you sure you weren't friends with Pepper too?" And Dave said, "No, Pepper hated me for the things that we did to them." So Gloria convinced him, eventually, it took her about 5 minutes, so Dave knelt down, pursed his own lips, and he pressed his lips to Pepper's. And Pepper let loose another excited scream, and she went running back up to her climbing perch, and Dave collapsed into a fit of sobbing. So I'm not going to try to tell you what that kiss meant to Pepper. That kind of conjecture would probably get me kicked off the TEDx stage. But I think it's pretty clear what that kiss meant to Dave. He felt that Pepper had given him a small measure of forgiveness. So a lot of stuff has happened since I was at Fauna. 2 of the chimps you've met, Tom and Pepper, have passed away. But 2 new chimpanzees, named Tatu and Lulis, the last 2 chimps of the famous sign language experiments at Central Washington State University, have now joined the Fauna family. and apparently they're settling in quite nicely. Also, beyond the bounds of the chimp house, the world has started to realize the debt, the incredible debt that we owe the chimpanzee. Countries around the world have outlawed invasive research on chimps, and now America is the last country where you can actually do this sort of research still. But on that front, last year, the National Institutes of Health said that they were going to retire 90% of their federally owned chimpanzees to sanctuaries like Fauna. It's an amazing step forward. There's still tons of work to do because there's still nearly 500 chimpanzees who are owned privately by pharmaceutical companies and the like in labs in America. But it's an amazing first start. So can chimpanzees forgive? Perhaps, yes. And can chimpanzees forgive us? That might not be the right question either. Could a chimpanzee like Sue Ellen, who was raised in a circus for the first 13 years of her life and then sold and abandoned into a research lab, who had her teeth knocked out with a hammer and chisel when she was young, could a chimp like Sue Ellen ever forgive us? I mean, it seems like an absurd question to ask. And that's why I think the only question we need to ask about forgiveness is this: do we deserve it? Across North America and around the world, there's tens of thousands of people who are raising awareness, raising funds, and advocating for chimpanzees in captivity and animals in captivity in general. And even the television situation is changing. Now, when a live chimpanzee appears in a commercial on TV, the next day the offending company is deluged with emails and letters and boycotts from people like you and people like me. Just keep your eye out at the Super Bowl tomorrow and see if you can guess which company is going to draw my ire and the ire of tens of thousands of other people on Monday morning. And even Hollywood is getting into the action. The Planet of the Apes franchise. No live chimpanzees are used in that movie. It's all CGI. Do you know what this means? This means you don't need to eat a ton of bananas to be in a movie with James Franco. All you need to do is go to animation school, finish top of your class, and you're off to Hollywood. So Gloria and her staff, they've been working for a long, long time to earn a little bit of this forgiveness from chimpanzees. And they understand the lesson of Jethro and of Toby, which is that forgiveness can't happen without regret. And that it can't happen without someone being willing to reach out their hand first. There's so many things we can do. We can donate to the Fauna Foundation if we want to, or other sanctuaries to help them continue their good works. We can write to government officials in the United States to urge them to pass the Great Ape Protection and Cost Savings Act. We can mobilize our local communities to care about animals in captivity and the plight of chimps in research. And we can just tell our friends and family about Tom and Pepper and Sue Ellen and Jethro and Toby so that maybe their stories won't be forgotten. So I've asked you a lot of questions, and I just want to ask you one more. What will you do? How will you help earn a little bit of that forgiveness from chimpanzees? How will you reach out your hand? Thank you very much.